Okay, in the interest of beginning on time and ending on time, I'm going to go ahead and get started while some more people are filing in. You're just missing the part where I talk about myself, so no big deal. Welcome to everybody. Hopefully your conference is going well. This is a great turnout for Search. My name is Scott Hillier. This is my contact information up here. Feel free to send me an email after we're done here if you have some follow-up questions. And for the next hour and 15 minutes, we're going to be talking about building search-driven applications inside of SharePoint 2013. And this is going to span a spectrum of solutions, many of which we can build with no code at all. So one of the things that I think is really impressive about what the search team did in this version of SharePoint is they took a lot of things that I used to have to write code to do, and they gave them to us directly in the browser. You don't even need a SharePoint designer or anything else. Just go right in the browser and make solutions. And again, these are the types of solutions I used to have to write code for, so I think that stuff's pretty exciting. Before we get into any detail, just a couple minutes on myself if I haven't had a chance to meet you yet. Again, my name is Scott Hillier. I'm a SharePoint MVP. I've been working in SharePoint really exclusively since about 2003. I don't do anything else all day long. It's SharePoint and things related to SharePoint. I spend about 75% of my time doing actual project work for folks, about 25% of my time doing stand-up training. So it gives me a nice mix of sort of horizontal coverage where I have to teach you about every module if you're in a training class with me, but also some good vertical stuff in some of the projects we've done. We've gotten pretty deep into search. We've had a lot of issues we've had to resolve in search. So hopefully it gives me a little bit of depth under the keel, if you will, to help you guys understand what's important. Here's the agenda we're going to cover. We're going to talk a little bit, give you an overview. Again, this is specifically for developers, right? So we're going to take a developer perspective when we talk about search. I'm going to give you the basic building blocks that you need to build search solutions. Talk about doing some of these no-code things first, so we'll begin with those. Then talk about the REST and CSOM endpoints for search and how we can utilize those. And finally, we'll wrap it up with search-based apps. So we'll build some SharePoint apps along the way as well. Okay, first, our overview of search specifically for developers. Just a note here, there's a lot of things you can do with search. I was in the session, sitting in the session, the last one that finished, and they were writing some server-side code up here. And certainly there's a lot of things you can do with some traditional SharePoint approaches. This session is focused on things that you can do both in Office 365 and on premises. So we're really limiting ourselves to, to those things that don't involve writing server-side code. There's one or two exceptions to that in the presentation, things that can't be done in O365. But for the most part, the things I'm showing you are for people that have Office 365 and for people that have on-premises installations. The first thing I want to talk about is really just where search should fit in your mind. When you look at everything SharePoint has to offer, all these different workloads that you could consider using, where is it that search should fit in your mind? Well, most people, when they think about search, immediately what comes to mind is typing some kind of a keyword in a box, right? And you get a bunch of results back, and you're disappointed because what you wanted isn't on the first page. And, that's kind of what people think about with search. But the way I think about search and the way I want to encourage you to think about search is I think about search as a data access technology. In fact, I think about it as the data access technology. And let me explain to you why I say that. If you think about SharePoint and you get involved in SharePoint as a developer, it's very common when an organization rolls out SharePoint for the end users to quickly realize that they can be assigned tasks anywhere inside of SharePoint. How on earth am I supposed to know all the tasks that I'm supposed to do if they're splattered all over SharePoint? And by the way, there are calendars all over SharePoint. So how do I even know what's going on when these things are splattered all over SharePoint? So it's very common for developers to get involved in creating what I'll just loosely call aggregation solutions. That is, go around SharePoint, find all the stuff, and bring it back to me. Okay? So in the days gone by, we might use something like the SP site data query to do that, right? So we write a little camel query, SP site data query. We go, hey, go find all the tasks in the task list for me and bring them back and aggregate them. Well, that's server-side code. So guess we're not looking at doing that anymore, right? So no SP site data query. Well, then we had the good old SP query too. That was good for one list, but alas, camel and SP query, server-side code. So we'll line that one out. And then you remember when Link was cool, like a week ago? Link was cool? Yeah, that was cool, right? Right? Because you get IntelliSense, you get compile time checking, life is good. I guess that's not cool anymore, right? So then you start to think about, well, what are my data access technologies then in this brave new world of, writing no more server-side code? Well, you're talking about CAML and the client-side object model, right? You can use REST to go against a list. But really what's interesting about CAML and CSOM and REST, those things don't let us do aggregation solutions. They're really targeting single lists. You can't say go somewhere and pull back all the tasks, go somewhere and get all the events. The one thing that does that is search. I like to say search is the thing that knows where all the bodies are buried, right? Because it crawls every deep, dark corner of your SharePoint farm. So when I think of search, I think of it as a data access technology, and I think of the solutions that we're building as solutions that are using search as a data access layer. So I want you to kind of think about it that way as we go along. Okay, so what types of things am I going to show you? This is an overview of all the different things you can do. There are other sessions this week that go deeper into some of these different solutions, but we're going to take a look at some particular classes of solutions in this session. The first one is extending the Search Center. The idea behind extending the Search Center is to take an out-of-the-box Search Center that has things like everything, people, conversation, and videos, and add your own extensions to that. So you can see I've got an image here that's showing my events, my tasks, my teams. I'll actually show you this solution. So take the out-of-the-box Search Center and add to it. Windows 8 apps. One of the things that we don't talk a lot when we have all this emphasis on SharePoint apps are the Windows 8 apps, which can also use the same REST and CSOM endpoints to create interesting solutions that run inside of Windows 8. So I'll show you one of those as well. And then, of course, good old SharePoint apps. So here we have an example of an A through Z employee directory that I'll actually show you. So these are some of the categories of apps that we're going to create. Again, some require no code, and some require us to write a little bit of code. All right, before we dig into that in any depth then, let's just take a look at search in general from the developer's perspective. This is a diagram that I use quite often to talk to developers about search. And I just want to work through the little pieces here from left to right. And if you think about any search engine, anything that you would work with, of course there are content sources that you need to access, right? And in order for a search engine to access content sources, it really needs two things. It needs to be able to access the repository where the items of interest are, and then when it gets an item of interest, it has to be able to parse that item in order to put it into the index. Everybody should know at this point, I'm guessing, right, that there's no more FAST, right? So FAST and SharePoint have been put together. How many FAST folks do we have in here? Let's all have a moment of silence for them. Okay? Sorry about that. Yes, and so if you were a big user of the Content API, you're going to stay in the denial phase a little bit longer than everybody else. So when we access now, right, we have this crawl approach that we're using. So we need to be able to gain access to those external repositories, retrieve something from them, and then parse it. And so we still have mechanisms to extend there. Like we can still write business connectivity services, .NET assembly connectors, which we did in 2010. You'll notice that that's down there in the lower left is custom in sort of that peach color. So peach on the diagram means that's an extensibility point for us as developers, but I'm not covering it, okay, because it doesn't work in both places. And orange means it's an extensibility point that we care about. Green, of course, is just the core of search. So we can still do that. You can still write BCS connectors. And then as the indexer works, it feeds content through the content pipelining on the way to the index. It's influenced by the analyzer, which does things like looks at query results and who clicked on what most often, so it can boost results up. That's what the analyzer is doing for you. You'll also see another extensibility point, the web service callout. The idea behind the web service callout, they were actually showing it in the last session, is that you can set up rules that kick things out of the content pipeline, and they get sent off to a custom web service that you wrote, and that custom web service receives all of the managed properties that have been assigned to that object as it's going through the pipeline, and then you can grab them and manipulate them in code. So you can boost things, change things, normalize things, and send them back into the pipeline. Obviously, you wouldn't want to do that for every single item because it could be expensive, so you set up rules to kick them out. Again, that's a peach extensibility point for us, which means I'm not talking about it in this session, but you can do it. Finally, the stuff gets into the indexing engine, and of course that indexing engine is filling up that index, and there's a search schema in there. So if you've done any work in SharePoint 2010, you'll find 2013 to be very familiar that way. It has managed properties, it has crawled properties, and so we can influence that search schema. We can create our own managed properties, a little bit more on that as we go along. So that's kind of an extensibility point for us. Then what happens across the top, of course, is we actually want to query against that index. So we have the query engine and the query pipeline. And the big extensibility points for us are those giant REST and CSOM bubbles right there, which is really where everything we do is going to go into the search engine and set up our apps. If you look at the CSOM point, you'll see that the CSOM point is used by no-code solutions that we create, but also in green, the Search Center and topic pages that come with SharePoint out of the box. So just the regular Search Center and that new WCM capability to drive websites off of catalogs that are lists, those are all using that CSOM endpoint. The REST endpoint can be used for SharePoint apps, the Windows 8 apps, and of course mobile apps as well. So those are the places that we'll go in. So this shows us all the different things that we can do with search and sort of gives you, a nice roadmap for the places that you might be able to write extensions. Okay, so now that we understand that, let's move on to talk about the basic building blocks behind search applications. The first is managed properties. As I said, 2013 has managed properties just like 2010 does. And if you haven't done a lot of work with managed properties, basically the way that it works is that when the crawler goes around and crawls stuff, it creates what we call crawled properties. And the crawled properties go into the index, but we don't really want to execute our searches against the crawled properties because if you have a couple of different repositories that all have the concept of title, let's say we're crawling 3 different document repositories, they might all have the concept of the title of a document, but one calls it OWS title, another calls it title underscore name, I don't know, whatever, and something else has some really cryptic name that it uses for it. There's no way that we could understand that those are the things we want to search for with title. So what happens is crawled properties get rolled up into managed properties, and we can associate one or more crawled properties with a managed property. That's exactly the way it was in 2010. That's the way 2010 works. And in fact, that's the way it works in 2013, which is great because it makes it pretty familiar to you if you have some 2010 experience about the types of things you need to do to set up the foundation for your solutions. There are some new capabilities. Site columns become managed properties in 2013. You'll find that publishing and multiple lines are prefixed with this special OWS underscore R. Managed metadata that gets crawled is OWS tax ID, and everything else is OWS underscore Q. So the point here is that there is a formula for creating managed properties from site columns, and if you go at it that way, if you create site columns as part of your solution, then you're going to get these managed properties as well. I'll also point out that you can create managed properties in 2013 at multiple levels. So you can create managed properties at the search service application level. You can create them at the site collection level. There are some restrictions in how these get created. And so what Microsoft has done for us is that in some cases, they've actually given us predefined managed properties that we can use to assign our own values to. But the key takeaway from this is that the managed properties are very similar to what they are in 2010, and they can be assigned at multiple levels. One thing that is a little different here is that the managed properties in 2013 all have properties. So we have managed properties that have properties. And the difference here is that you have much more control over what it is a managed property can be used for. So for example, if you'd like to sort by a particular managed property, then you would set its sortable property to true. And that opens up a lot of really interesting possibilities, right? Like people love to have things sorted alphabetically. I'm not exactly sure why. The search engine goes to all this trouble to decide what item it thinks is most important to you and put it at the top, and then people go, how come it's not sorted alphabetically? Okay, sorted alphabetically, it goes all the way to the bottom. But anyway, if you really wanted to do that, you could do that by setting the sortable property, and you can see some of the other ones here. So if you want to be able to query it, then it has to be queryable. If you want to be able to use it in a refiner, it has to be refinable. If you want to be able to bring it back as a search result and show it as a search result, it has to be retrievable. You get the idea. And so if you've done some 2010 work, this could throw you at first because you'll be like, how come my managed property isn't bringing back any results? Well, maybe you haven't tagged it as a queryable managed property. So just look out for that. Next is keyword query syntax. So in 2010, we had keyword query syntax and SQL query, and of course, FQL, or fast query language, for our fast people. So the story here is that the keyword query syntax in 2013 is now improved beyond what it was in 2010. And the idea really is that the keyword query syntax in 2013 is supposed to be all you really need. So much so do we believe that the SQL query has been removed from the product. So if you had solutions that were using SQL query language, those are going to need to be redone. Fast query language is still available inside of 2013. It's just not cool to use it. Right? So you really want to stick with the keyword query language that we have. There's been some nice improvements to it, like near, words, and XRank. We'll take a look at a couple of those as we go along. All right, let's do that, in fact. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and jump over here and just show you some keyword queries. Now, one of the things I find interesting about just looking at keyword query samples is, you know, I do a lot of work in search, and a lot of organizations have problems getting back what they want from search. That's really probably the number one thing, right? So we all know how end users use search. They go to the Search Center in SharePoint, they see the empty text box, they type a word that they kind of think of probably is supposed to be somewhere in the document, and then they get really upset that the document they were thinking about isn't the very first one, right? I mean, that's what happens. And then the conclusion after a very short period of time is, wow, search in SharePoint is lousy, right? People say that, search in SharePoint is lousy. Well, you got to know how to ask it the right question. So one of the things I tell the people when we're doing this session is, I tell them, look, one of the best things that you can take from this session is to teach your end users a little keyword query language. Maybe not everything, you know, sometimes it can get a little complicated, but if they knew a little bit of keyword query language, it would really help them quite a bit. And you know, it can be as simple as knowing how to do a property restriction, right? So we can do things with properties where we have a managed property and we can apply a restriction to it. And we can do this type of thing inside of 2010. So for example, here's a query. Here's a query here. Let's do a property restriction that says file extension docx. And I'm going to go ahead and click on this. It'll go ahead and run the query for us and bring it back. And you can see that I have a managed property here, file extension, and I've said docx. Well, what's interesting about this is if you think about an end user coming in and saying, you know, I'm looking for apps, well, they type in apps and they're disappointed because they didn't find the document they were looking for. But simply saying file extension docx and kicking out everything but Word documents can go a long way to helping users find exactly what they want, right? And to me, that seems like something an end user could probably embrace, some little tips like that to help make search better. Okay, a couple of other ones in here that are important. One of my favorite ones, and again, this is some stuff you could do in 2010, but it's worth mentioning. One of my favorite managed properties is content class. Content class. Because what content class allows you to do is it allows you to ask for a certain category of things. So for example, if you say content class equals STS_web, you are explicitly saying, I only want search to return websites to me. Just sites, nothing else. You can say content class is STS_site, and you're saying, I only want top-level sites in the portal. Just return site collections to me. And these become very powerful things. You know, one of the things we all know is that SharePoint does not provide cross-site collection navigation, right? And yet all of you probably have multiple site collections, because what most people do, right, is they make site collection for each department. And then you look at it and you go, how's everybody supposed to navigate across the site collections? And there are some solutions to it, but the best ones I've ever done are ones that use search to actually find the possible site collections in the farm and surface them inside the navigation, right? And this is the kind of thing I'm trying to get you to leave the session with, which is search is a data access technology. If you ask it the right questions, it can solve a lot of problems for you. Another thing that we were just talking about is this idea of finding all of the tasks or all of the events in calendars. And so if you look down here, I'm going to point out this one down here at the bottom if you can read it. It says content class equals STS_list item_events. Let's go ahead and run that one right here. And you can see that I brought back a list of events. So these are things that are going on in the organization. Now, if I just go ahead, I'm going to copy this thing out and stick it in Notepad here so that we can get a better view of it. Okay, so here's the query that I just ran. Let's break it down. Content class equals STS underscore list items underscore events. Calendar event date is greater than the 1st, and calendar event date is less than the 31st. What did I just do? I just created a corporate calendar for 2012 without writing a stitch of code, right? That query will bring back all the events that are going on in the organization for 2012. And it is silly easy to be able to do some of these things in search that solve these aggregation problems that you're constantly being asked, right? So just knowing the keyword query language can go a long way. And by the way, I consider these to be, the first no-code solutions. This is the easiest thing to do. And we can even take this. What's very interesting to me about this, and this is, again, also true in 2010, is that you can come up here and you can actually take that URL, right? So search is URL accessible, which means that if you take that exact same URL and you just drop it into a new tab, you're going to get the exact same results back, right? So you can have a ridiculously simple solution, which is nothing more than a list of links that have these predefined queries, and people can click them and they can see all their tasks, and people can click them and they can see all their events, right? In my mind, that's the first no-code solution that you can write. And just by asking the right question, you can get a long way. Okay, a couple of other things just to show some things that are new here. Here's the X rank. So now we have this ability to boost results inside of search by using X rank. I'll go ahead and put this up here where we can see it better. There it is right there. So here's the new X rank, which gives a boost. These are all the different parameters that you can boost. But basically what this does is it boosts file extension docx. That's different than saying just file extension docx, because just file extension docx filters out everything but Word documents. Boosting pushes the Word documents up to the top. It doesn't take everything else out. So, for example, if you come down here and we just go to the next page, you'll see that there are actually things in here that are not Word documents. They've just been pushed to the bottom of the results. So that's a cool thing, the ability to do the X rank. Okay, other stuff, we now have near and O-near. I haven't decided how to pronounce this. O-near, O-near, on-near. Who says O-near? You like O-near? Hey, look at that. On-ear. So if I come up here and I say apps or near SharePoint, then basically what I'm doing is searching for those two words that are appearing close to each other inside the document. And finally, just a last quick one to show you some things that are new is we can use words. Words is pretty cool. What words does is it says, in this case, rest and representational state transfer should be considered to be exactly the same word. So if there were a query rule or something else being applied to that, these things should be considered to be exactly the same word, right? So those are some of the things that are new in keyword query language. And like I said, it becomes pretty simple to be able to write solutions that use this type of thing, especially when you go with that URL accessible idea, and solve some basic problems for your end users, even if you can't teach them keyword query language. Okay, so with that foundational piece, now let's move on to talk a little bit about building blocks. So remember, the keyword query language is our core language we're going to use to ask questions of the engine. And here are our building blocks: result sources, query rules, result types, and search navigation. A result source, this little note here says, gee, it's analogous to a federated location or a scope. Basically, what a result source allows you to do is to take one of the larger sources, one of the larger indexes, like your SharePoint farm, and then define a slice of that you actually want to search. So it's kind of like a scope that way, but we're going to use keyword query language to make that definition. Next is query rules. What query rules do is alter the query that an end user runs under some kind of condition. So the classic example is when somebody types in, say, marketing deck, right? They were showing this in the keynote. They type in marketing deck. the query rule converts deck. It removes the word deck from the query and says, I know what you meant PowerPoint. And it substitutes back in file extension as PPTX. So the idea is to let the users ask questions in natural ways, but the query rule goes, I know what you really meant, and I'm going to modify your code for you. Result types allow that when a result comes back from search, so you imagine in your mind a bunch of rows that are coming back from search, there are criteria that that row meets. And when it meets a set of criteria, it is considered to be of a certain result type. So I'm bringing back an event, I'm bringing back a document, I'm bringing back a task. It's of a certain result type. And the reason that that's cool is because when something is determined to be of a certain result type, then it can be told to be displayed in a way that is particular for that result type. And that's really critical to us, right? Because one of the key things to making these search-based applications really hum is that the return data should be displayed to a user in a way that makes sense for that kind of data, and they should be able to operate on it within search results. What does that really mean? It means when you search for videos, you should see the videos in the search results, and you should be able to play them there, right? So that means I got to render them differently than I would an image or a document. And that's what result types help us do. Finally, search navigation is it's in here in this 40-point font or whatever, so it seems like, oh my gosh, search navigation is a whole other thing. That's just the tabs on the Search Center, but that's a thing that we're going to use to be able to engage our different apps. So it's really a simple thing, but it is a key thing, our ability to navigate between the different applications that we create. Okay, so as I said with the result sources, the way that this works is you're going to select a source, and there are 4 different sources that you can choose from. The local SharePoint index, your farm that got crawled. A remote SharePoint index, somebody else's farm that got crawled. Anything that's OpenSearch and Exchange. And then you're going to write a keyword query language query that defines a subset of one of those sources that you'd like to use inside of your solution. The query rules, again, are always applied to a given result source. So everything starts with a result source. Once you have that subsection that you want, then you're going to specify a rule like a keyword query, a keyword match or a topic category match, and then you're going to apply some kind of change based on that. So did you type a word? I'm going to change the word. Maybe I want to generate what we call a result block, which are some promoted results that get pushed up to the top. And all of this stuff should make sense to us as users, right? So this is the idea that says, if somebody's searching for something and that happens to be on special this week, my query rule is going to pick that up and push those results all the way to the top, right? And we experience this all the time when we're searching. So these are really just the fundamental tools that let us implement the types of things that we see all the time. Result types, as I said, they're bound to a given result source and defined by a rule. So that means you came from this result source, you have these rules that are true for you, therefore you are of a certain result type. And when you are of a certain result type, then you are associated with a template for display. And that determines how you look. Can I play the video inside of Search? Can I see the image inside of Search? Can I flip through the PowerPoint slides inside of Search? Now, what I find interesting about all of these things, these ideas of transforming the query and all that type of stuff, I used to do a lot of that inside of 2010. You know how I did it? I overrode the core results web part, right? So in 2010, we got this great ability to override the core results web part, and then we could write a bunch of code that did really interesting things. So I had a presentation I did in the 2010 space where you could type things in like overdue, and it would show you all your overdue tasks. Right? Because I would just grab that, modify the keyword query language, and show you your overdue tasks. But my point is, I had to override the core results web part and write a bunch of server-side code to do it. And now what I'm going to show you is this is all stuff that we can do right in the browser by pointing and clicking. So it really is, to me, pretty amazing what the search team has done and the tools that they've given us. I mentioned the search navigation again. This is really just the thing that allows us to have navigation across the Search Center. You'll see that in action here in just a second. Now, one of the things we have to consider, right, is if we're sort of expanding our idea of what it means to develop these search-based apps, because we have this Visual Studio, right? I use Visual Studio to create apps, and if I want to extend that idea a little bit, in 2010 I was using a SharePoint designer to make apps, right? So was that a developer tool in 2010? Yeah, some people said sure it was a developer tool in 2010, right? But now I'm telling you that the browser is kind of becoming a developer tool in 2013. So that's cool that you can do all that, but then one of your questions should be, well, what about dev to QA to production, right? Because you remember in the old days when you do something in SharePoint Designer and it was locked there, and then in order to move it to QA or production, you have to take the exact same person and put them in front of another machine and have them click on exactly the same thing, right? And that was the migration strategy. So we don't want that migration strategy for our search-based solutions that we're doing inside the browser. So what the search team has given us is this ability to export and import the search settings. So this is our migration strategy. We get this output called search configuration.xml that's going to give us the rules, the sources, the managed properties that we've defined in the browser as an XML file that we can then take down the street, put into the QA environment, and load these exact same rules, sources, and managed properties, which is really handy because, listen, I don't know if you guys have ever rolled out a really large search solution that has a lot of custom managed properties. Man, making sure the index has all the managed properties, they're associated correctly with all the crawled properties, that the search web parts use all the correct managed properties is a real headache. So the idea that somebody can give us this and just export it out and we can import it into another environment is a really, really powerful thing. And I'm going to show you as well a little bit later in the session that we can take these things and we can actually package them with our apps so that when someone installs our app, they get our query rules, our result types, things like that, which makes it pretty cool for us to be able to do that. Okay. All right, so now let's talk a little bit then about how we use these building blocks for some no-code solutions. So I have already said that I consider the very first, most primitive type of no-code solution to be links with predefined queries in them. Because search is URL accessible, it's easy for me to put predefined links into SharePoint and help end users find the things that they want. We also have this ability to extend the Search Center by creating our own building blocks that we have there and adding our own search verticals in. I'm going to show you that in a second. And also utilizing the content search web part. If you've seen the content by search web part, this is a web part designed to aggregate by using search to go find things and surface them inside the web part. And the only bummer here is that the content search web part's not available in Office 365. So that's unfortunate, but that little bit is something we can do on premises, but not in Office 365. All right, let's take a look at it. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to show you is the content by search web part. So here we are on the home page of my Wingtip intranet. And, I've got some standard stuff over here. You can see the navigation table of contents. But what I want to focus your attention on is this upcoming events section over here. Upcoming events section over here. The upcoming events section is using the content by search web part to aggregate events throughout the portal and bubble them up to the top on the home page so that you can see what's coming. If we come in here to the page, we'll just go ahead and put the page in edit mode. You can see that indeed we do have this web part floating around over here. We'll drop this thing down so we'd like to edit the web part. Okay. And the big thing over here is just clicking on this change query button right here. And what it does is it brings up a little window where we can do some work. And let's look at what we've got here, and then we're going to back up and take a look at the source that made it happen. So what you can do with this content by search web part is you'll come in and you'll select a result source that you want to work with. You can see that I have a result source here called events, which basically is giving me the query that brings back all of the events. And then you can also see that it's showing me test query over here, so it's showing me some samples from that. So what I've done is to basically define a new result source that contains the subset of items I really care about, in this case, just events that are present inside the portal. And then I've just told the content by search web part to surface that. And then, just like in 2010, you've got some a capability here to, hang on, let me See if we can get all over the side here. You've got some capabilities here to pick how you want these displayed, so you can see that we have these display templates that we can choose from. So this is a web part that uses result sources and display templates to basically run a fixed query and bring back some content. Now, it does have the ability to take some inputs into it, like you can pass in a query parameter or what have you. But think of it as sort of a mini search-based application that's super good at aggregating content. Now, in order to build this thing out, or really any content by search, we're going to have to be able to define our result sources and to define our result types. So let's take a closer look at that. And I'm going to do that by showing you this second example, which is this extended search center. So the second no-code solution that we can look at is this idea of taking a regular old search center and then adding into it your own scopes that you want to search. So I've just dropped an out-of-the-box search center here, and the out-of-the-box search center has everything, you know, people, so I can come to the people and type Cox, right? And this is just conversations here that Brian's in, videos. These are all the out-of-the-box things that you get. But what I've done is I've extended this thing now to have different scopes that it looks at: events, tasks, teams, portals, and documents. So one of the things that I think is really challenging for people in SharePoint is that, you know, if you're from a place that has thousands and thousands of users and hundreds or thousands of sites, it can be really difficult to figure out what content in SharePoint matters to you. So one of the things that I've been working on for a long time is the idea of using search to find things that matter to you, and then surface that stuff up in a very personal way. So if we come back and we just go, click on this again, you'll see that it takes me to this My Events section right here, which is just surfacing events that are happening. Now, you'll notice a couple of things about this. You'll notice that they're being displayed in a very particular way. So if it's an event, it gets this calendar icon. You'll notice that these things are also appearing in chronological order. So they've been sorted, right? One of the interesting things about search solutions is that search itself, right, the basic idea of search is that it wants to return things to you based on some kind of relevancy calculation, right? So it looks at some kind of factor and it says, I've decided that this is the most important thing to you. But there are many search-based solutions for which a relevancy presentation doesn't make sense to a user. So I don't want you to tell me this is the event I think you're thinking of. I want you to show me the events in chronological order, right? I don't want you to show me this is the person I think you're thinking of. I want you to show me the people in alphabetical order. And those are all complaints you hear right away from people when they say search results, for example, of people, right? They always say, how come it isn't in A to Z order? So we're able to do that quite easily by setting the sortable properties that we want. So in order to make this happen, well, let's just take a look at some of the other ones. So we've got another scope here for tasks. So this one runs a query that goes off and finds all the tasks that are assigned to me in SharePoint, right? This is a no-code solution that surfaces every one of the tasks that's assigned to me inside of SharePoint. My teams, this shows me all of the sites in SharePoint that I have access to. My portals, this shows me all of the site collections inside the farm that I have access to. And finally, my documents, these are documents that I have authored. So these are all very personal views of SharePoint, ones that I think are very valuable to end users. And we're able to, you know, I said I used to create this solution by writing a bunch of code, and now I'm doing it with just the basic building blocks. So let's take a look at how this is done. Right here inside this solution, I'm going to come down to Site Settings. And here on the Site Settings page, if I scroll down, you'll notice that Search now has its own little section in Site Settings. This is enough in my mind to show you how important Microsoft thinks search is to this. I mean, really, if you're not writing server-side code, this is probably the most powerful utility you have for finding things in SharePoint. And so down here, you'll see the basic building blocks: result sources, result types, query rules. Let's take a look at a couple of these. I'll go into the result sources. Now remember, a result source is a subset of the entire index that you would like to search. So let's just pick on My Events right here. I'll come into My Events, click on this thing. So when I define the result source, I give it a name, my events. I'm going against the local SharePoint. This is just the local farm here. All of my solutions are doing that. And then I use this query transformation to specify what I want. Let's go ahead and launch the query builder and take a look at this thing. So here is what you care about right here. This is, let me go ahead and make that big for you so we can all see it together. Okay, this is the thing you care about. Let's break it down so we can see how this is defined. So what we've got is this curly brace search terms curly brace. That means whatever the user typed in. Okay, so whatever the user types in gets substituted in here. Content class equals STS underscore list item underscore events. We've seen that already. It means I only want calendar events, right? And then it says where the calendar event date is greater than today minus 30. So what I have is I've defined a result source that will show me all of the events that are in any calendar throughout the farm that are happening a month ago or any time in the future, right? And if I haven't said it yet or you haven't thought it yet, this is a trimmed result set, right? If I don't have access to the event, I'm not going to see it in my results. I don't have to do anything special to get that. I get that, right? If you didn't get the wristband for the red party, you're not going to see the red party in your results, okay? So that's a pretty powerful thing to get for free. And that's a typical result source right there. And then you can see that I've basically done the same thing. I basically have done the same thing for each of the other ones. So if we just pick on, for example, say my tasks, we can go down here, look at the query builder, and in this case you can see content class is STS underscore list item underscore tasks, and then the very powerful assign to and the token username. So this brings back all the tasks that are assigned to the current user. That's pretty good, right? Okay, so those are result sources. Now, if you are interested in building a no-code solution, really all you need is a result source, because right now you could take that result source and put it in a content by search web part, drop it on the page, say the task one we just looked at, drop it on the page, and when people come to the home page, they're going to see their tasks. That's it. That's really all you have to do. It's that simple. But we quite often want to go further. So in our idea, what we're doing is we're extending the search center here. So in extending the search center, what we're doing is adding pages to the search center. So if we come into the pages here, you can see that for each one of the different scopes that I want to search, I've added an additional page to the search center. And this is exactly the same thing I used to do in 2010. I could add pages to the search center in the same way. And if we just pick on my events here, let's go to that, and then we'll put this page in edit mode. You'll see that when you put the page in edit mode, that there is a results source web part. There it is, search results web part. Come down here, edit this thing, and go to change query. And now you can see that I've selected my events right there. So now when you search that scope, you're going to be searching this query, only the events. You can type whatever you want. I'm going to include those keywords, right, because of the search terms token. But then we can also look at the sorting inside of here. And this is where we can affect the way that things are sorted, either in the results source itself or here. Either way will work. But the point is that this is going to let you adjust for things like I want them in chronological order or I want them in alphabetical order. Okay, so if you wanted to make a search vertical, really that could be the end of what you're doing. You wouldn't have to do any more. But we'd like to do a little bit more than that. So let's come back to the site settings now. And now what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the result types. So click on result types. And now what I've done is I've defined some new result types here. So one of my result types, we'll focus on the events one here. Here's my events result type. We click on this. We'll say edit. And we come in here, we give it a name, of course. We're calling it my events for the result type. And it says, what's the condition? Well, our condition is going to be pretty simple here. If you come from the my events result source, then you are considered to be a my event result type. If you meet this criteria then, what we're going to do is apply a template to you. And the template that gets applied is right down here, and it's applying the event underscore default template to it. So the point here is that when you set up a rule like this, you can then go define a template which says, okay, what's the icon, what properties am I going to show, what happens when you hover over it, all that type of stuff. Now these templates, I guess strictly speaking, you could call this writing code, because we have to go in and do a little bit of HTML to define our template. So I'm going to go ahead and open one of these for you. Let's go ahead and open a file here, and we'll come into search. Here's my SharePoint templates. Event default. Let's take a look at that one here. And I'll go ahead and make that larger so we can see it. So the way that this system works is that you're going to write a little HTML with some tokens inside of it, and then Search is going to recognize these tokens and then do some replacement of managed properties within this template. There's a bunch of goo up here at the top here inside this comment block. Mostly the thing I want to point out to you here is that you have to specify the managed properties that you want returned from Search, right? Because we can't return every managed property. So you're going to say this template needs these managed properties returned in order to do its work. So you can see like calendar event date, calendar end date. And basically what you're doing is specifying a managed property and kind of an alias for it. That's why you see these duplicates right here. But then you can use those later. So I can come down here and you'll see where I have a div tag, and then inside of it you can see that I have the calendar event date and the location right here. And you use this syntax, context, current item, calendar event date, and this maps to the managed properties that you're returning. And basically what you can do then is use this templating system to create any little chunk of HTML that you want that will determine what this thing looks like when it's displayed. So how many folks did XSLT in 2010 on the results web part? So is this awesome or what, man? Because that XSLT, right? I can't tell you, what's funny about that, I used to laugh about that. Picture in your mind with me now. You open up that core results web part, and it has a button on it. You remember what the button says? It says like XSLT Designer. That's what the button says. Am I right? You push it, it opens a big text box. So, and you can't read it. You're like this. Yeah, I know. So this is great, right? Because it lets us work in HTML, lets us work in Visual Studio with color and all that, so that's a good thing. Now what happens is after you make the template, and you got to put it inside of SharePoint, so let me show you where this thing goes. What happens is you go to the Master Pages and Pages Layouts library, okay? And inside of there you find a Display Templates folder, and in the Display Template folder you find a folder called Search. And in there, you upload the HTML. There's our event default HTML right there. You upload the HTML that you just designed. And then the way the templating system works is when you upload that HTML, it generates this JavaScript file here. Now, I'm not going to go into this in any great detail, the templating system. There's a strategy for some templating systems that are out there where they actually use JavaScript, but it's not actually functional code. They use it to flag certain things and to do replacements. And that's kind of what's going on here. We're not running a bunch of JavaScript code. It's a templating system that's using JavaScript markup to define it. So you work in the HTML, but the search engine and everything else wants this JavaScript markup that it's going to use to actually do the substitute. But we don't have to touch it. We don't have to look at it. We just focus on the HTML. But if you go back then to the actual, to the template, right, where you're going to see this though, hang on, let me get back to the correct spot here. Where you're going to see this is in your result type. If we come in here and we look at the My Events, the one that we've been working on, and you come down, you'll notice that the display template referenced here references the JS. You see it? Now when you go to make your result type though, it won't force you to pick that. It'll show you a list of the HTML files. You'll pick one and then it'll just substitute that JS. So don't let that throw you. It's just part of the templating system. Yeah, go ahead.
Does that automatically get generated on upload?
It's generated on upload, correct. You don't have to get your hands dirty at all. Just make the HTML and pretend like it doesn't exist. That's basically what I do. Okay, so that's the result type stuff. Last thing to look at then is the query rules. So let's go back to this site where we're working and back to the site settings. And now we're going to come down to the query rules. And query rules have been shown by folks, I think, in a couple of different sessions. We're going to touch on them here again. But basically, if we come into, let's see, yep, here we go, like my events, right? What we can do for my events is we can define a rule. And I've defined a rule called training events. I'm going to go click on this thing. And it says basically what happens is if the query you're typing exactly matches this word, then this query rule is going to fire. So if somebody comes up to the event search and they type the word training, then this event fires. And what does this event do? It changes the query that's been run. And if we come in here, we can see what it does. What it does is it substitutes this query for the user's query. So I don't care, so we're actually going to take over now and run a completely different query. And so the completely different query that we're running is this one right here that uses the managed property path. And the path that it's looking for is this reference all the way down to this list section in training. So what is this actually doing? What this thing is doing now is it's searching a single list. So we have a list in the farm where all the training events go, and if you type the word training, then it's going to go ahead and search that list and that list only. And that's really the power of query rules to be able to do that. So let's go back then. We'll leave this and we'll publish this. And we'll come back to our events here. And now what I'm going to do is just type the word training, okay, and we'll go ahead and run that. And now if you look at this, you'll see that I'm bringing back training events. Now, what's interesting about this is, of course, I'm getting hits on the keyword here. So these came back, you could argue, because they had training in them. But see this guy right here, this new employee orientation, that's training. But it doesn't have the word training in it. But it's in that list. And you can tell it's in the list because when you look at these guys, they're all down here inside this, this folder with the training, right? So that is the power of being able to do query rules. So those are our big building blocks. Now the last thing here is just how did I get this navigation stuff up here, which is really pretty simple. I'll come down here to the site settings. And then in our navigation, search settings, here we go. You can see that in the search settings here, I'm just able to add new nodes onto the search center that point to those pages I made. Right? So you get a complete no-code solution by making a new page, pointing at it in the navigation, creating a result source, creating result types, wiring those into the search results part, and you're all done. Right? You're all done. So you've just created a search solution that solves a bunch of problems. Now the only question is that dev to QA to production story, right? Well, that's where this guy comes in. Configuration export. So all you have to do is click on the configuration export, and this thing pops right up and allows you to save this search configuration.xml file, which has all that wonderful work that you did, and then you can walk over to the QA environment and install it. Okay? So that's the development story right in the browser. And again, if you never overrode the core results web part in 2010, you may not understand the magnitude of what's been done for you here, but if you've done that work and you've worked with managed properties and you worked with XSLT, this is a phenomenal amount of work that the search team did, and I think it's a really great job. And the other thing is, it also allows you to solve a lot of problems. So the need to go further now, I think that area has been stretched where we don't have to write code to solve a problem, right? And that's a really powerful thing, too, because who wants to write a bunch of code if we don't have to? Okay.
Question?
Yeah.
Since you're building this on dev server or your server, you may have additional result sources, types, things that you're not ready to push. the export import, is that selective or is that all?
The question is about what I do with the export import if I have like messy dev stuff inside of it. There's no selection part here. It just dumps the whole thing out. You get to go in and do a little bit of editing to get the stuff that you want. I'll take one more, but I have tons of stuff, so I can't get too derailed. But go ahead. The question is, am I showing my own VM or Office 365? The answer is I'm showing my own VM, but you can do this in Office 365. Yeah, same thing. Yep. Okay, so that's our no-code stuff. Okay, so now where everybody should be, right, is that you should be good with understanding query language. That's our language we use no matter what we're doing with these applications. We got these building blocks that don't require us to write any code, and we've stretched, hopefully, the area that we can get into where we're writing applications without having to break out code. But now we're coming into a world where, hey, we want to write some code. We need to get beyond this no-code stuff and move on. We're still going to use the same building blocks. It's really an important thing. The keyword query language, the result sources, the result types, the query rules are not some sort of independent, if you don't want to write code, you use these things. We're building on top of these layers. The things that we do in code now are going to be dependent upon keyword query language and those other building blocks in order to get things done. But what we're going to do now is we're going to add in REST and CSOM endpoints. So as we begin to write code then, the two places that we're going to touch search are those REST and CSOM endpoints. I've said this in some previous sessions, but it bears repeating here, is that if you think about going against the REST and CSOM endpoints, and you think about writing apps, hopefully everybody in here is kind of familiar with the idea that you can make a SharePoint hosted app, an auto-hosted app, or a provider-hosted app, right? You start to hear these terms more and more. And that you can use REST or CSOM, you can use JavaScript or C#, and when you put those things together, you really end up with these 4 combinations of ways that you can create apps in SharePoint. You can go JavaScript against the RESTful endpoint, you can go JavaScript against CSOM, you can go C# against the RESTful endpoint, and C# against CSOM. And I've said before, I'll just say again, that in my mind, the combinations that make the most sense are JavaScript and REST. A lot of the third-party libraries really work well with REST. It's much cleaner and easier to write that code. And the other one, so if you're going to tell me, I hate JavaScript, I'm never going to write a line of JavaScript, then what you really should be looking at is C# and CSOM. If you want to write, server-side code, my recommendation is C#, CSOM, MVC4, provider-hosted app, roll your own infrastructure, and you can have it there. Okay? But we can write any combination of these things against search. Right? It doesn't matter. Search provides us a RESTful endpoint and a CSOM endpoint. Any of these combinations will work. And we can also do SharePoint hosted, provider hosted, and auto hosted against the endpoint. Okay. When it comes to reaching the RESTful endpoint, let's start with REST. What you're seeing in front of you here are examples of executing RESTful searches. So when you're programming against REST, the big thing about REST is just coming up with the URI. And so as search developers, our URI is this underscore API, right? That's where everything starts, underscore API, /search, /query. Then you can put query text equals, and you can provide any legitimate keyword query syntax right there inside the URI. And if you take that URI and you paste it into a browser, it's going to spit back a bunch of XML that has all the search results in it. So it's a really simple model, right? You provide that URI with KQL in it, and the search engine returns you back a bunch of XML that has all of the results in it. You parse out the XML, show them the way you want. What's really cool about the RESTful endpoint, though, is the RESTful endpoint is really powerful. So anything that you could do with the keyword query class, right? Did you ever use a keyword query class in 2010? Right? We could run queries against the search engine in server-side code, had a bunch of properties. All of those things are available in the RESTful endpoint. So for example, the second thing where you select properties, query text equals test. Select properties is title and rank. What that's going to do is it's going to run a query using the keyword query language, simple test, just say test, but it's only going to return title and rank as the rows. Right? So you specify the managed properties that you want returned in your results. How about sorting? Well, you see a couple of examples of that. So the first one down there is searching for test again. And then it says sort list equals last modified time descending. And then the last one is last modified time descending, and then rank ascending. So this opens up really a very large set of possibilities for search-based applications, because now you can ask for exactly the managed properties you want back, sorted exactly the way you want them. So people A through Z, events in chronological order, tasks by due date, all of these things become possible now, and you're looking through the entire farm to get this information. Here's a little JavaScript against REST. If you went to my sessions this morning, we did a bunch of these things, but jQuery is really your friend as an app developer in SharePoint 2013. This uses the jQuery AJAX function, which takes the URI that you're interested in querying. So for us, it's just that keyword query language URI. You'd plug it right in here to URL. We want this information back as JSON, and we provide success or failure handlers for it. So basically what you do when you write your JavaScript code, you write that URI in here, you get the results back, you parse the XML out. Here's JavaScript and some CSOM, so you can use the client-side object model if you want. So we got to go ahead and get a context, right? This is exactly the same thing that we did in 2010. We can get an sp.client context. And then we use the keyword query here. The var keyword query is a new Microsoft.SharePoint.client.search.query.keyword query. And we provide the context. You can see that I set the query text there to any legitimate keyword query syntax that you want. And then the search executor is what's used to execute that search. So instead of making a RESTful call, you're going to use this search executor, which down at the bottom you'll see uses a query async call, the classic execute query async with success and failure handlers to come back. So these are the two ways using either REST or CSOM to run a query against the search engine. Now if you're thinking C#, then you can do it again, the two ways in C#, right? So we can do a C# RESTful call. Here we're using the HTTP web request class to make a new web request. Again, the URL is the same, right? We still want the same URI for REST. And we're going to use that HTTP web request to make the call. And then you'll notice the web response here. And then you see the await, right? The await keyword right here, which is going to wait for this web response to come back. And then we're going to create an XML reader out of that XML that came back so that we can parse it all up, right? So if you tell me I really, really don't want to write any JavaScript, here's a way that you can do it in a provider-hosted app that would all be managed code. And of course, you can do C# and CSOM, which I think is a little bit cleaner. You can get the new client context using the managed object model. This is the same approach that we take in 2010, right? The managed client object model. We have the keyword query class that we can provide the KQL to. Again, the search executor. You can see the results coming back. And then down there at the bottom, we have this result table, and we loop it all through it. I like this model. I think this is good. I personally prefer this way of doing it if you want to write managed code. I think it's cleaner than doing the REST thing. But you can see that you have all four of these options. And even though I'm showing them to you as in a search context, they work for all the REST and CSOM API points, right? And you follow basically the same strategy no matter what workload you're talking to. Okay, so in order to understand this, what we're going to do is take a look at a Windows 8 app. So I'm going to jump out of my server-side thing, and we're going to go into a Windows 8 app. And let's just go here. We'll start here. Okay, so here we are in Windows 8. So I just wrote an app that basically uses C# and REST to go against that endpoint. And if we look here on my desk, we can see that I have this employee directory app right here. By the way, as long as we're here, do you guys have the Steve Ballmer app? It's awesome. If I had audio on this thing, I would so do it for you. It's got all these clips of Steve Ballmer at all these different events, running around screaming and sweating and stuff like that. You got to get that. Yeah, that's worth at least 3 or 4 belly laughs. All right. So I'm going to come over here to this employee directory app. I'm going to click on this thing. And this thing brings up an A to Z employee directory. This is an extremely common request to get an A to Z employee directory. I am using people search to return these results. I am using a ridiculously simple query. Last name is the managed property. Last name, colon, the letter, like C, and then a star for the wildcard to return all of the people whose last name starts with C. I can go up here and I can click on the various letters here, and you can see that I'm basically running people searches against SharePoint in Windows 8. And then if I come to any particular one, then what I can do is I can come down here and I can click on somebody's name, and what it does is it surfaces their My Site for me. So this is Brian's public My Site. So this is a Windows 8 app using the RESTful endpoint and providing something that users ask for all the time, A to Z employee directory. If we just take a really quick look at the code that made that happen, my point here is that this can be really simple stuff to do. Okay, so this is a project that uses the Windows 8 app project stuff. You have to have a developer license and everything to create one of these. And it uses Silverlight, XAML, and that type of stuff. And so a lot of that are things that you know. I'm not going to spend some time on that. I just want to show you this view model here. So this uses the MVVM pattern that I discussed in my previous session. And this is the view model for people. And you can see that if we come down here, all I have is some C# code that builds up that query. So there's last name, colon. There's the letter that you're looking for. There's the star, the wildcard. I've asked to return these properties, last name, first name, job title, work email. You get the idea, okay? And then what happens is I go ahead and execute that query. I've got a little helper code down here at the bottom that's doing that HTTP web request to go ahead and get the results and streaming back the XML. If we come up here to the top, you'll see that when I get the results back, they're loaded into an XML reader. And then all I'm doing is parsing that stuff out. I'm just grabbing that stuff out to drive the display. That's it. So it's really, once you're making these URIs and you're hitting those endpoints, these patterns are very repeatable. It's the same thing over and over again. Get that data and just show it the way you want, whether it's a Windows 8 app, SharePoint app, doesn't matter. Okay. Coming around the clubhouse turn here. Last thing to discuss then is SharePoint apps, making use of these endpoints in SharePoint apps. Again, you have the same 4 developer options that we always have in these apps, and I've gone over my reasons why I think the JavaScript, REST, and C# and CSOM are the best. Here's just a little highlight of my evaluation of each one of those. I don't know if we need to spend any more time on this. I think I've made this pretty clear. You can see the SharePoint hosted, provider hosted, and auto hosted. I'm giving thumbs up to the ones that I think are best, the best combinations of SharePoint hosted, provider hosted, auto hosted, and the different technologies. I'll just be clear, this is my opinion. The X means doesn't work. The thumbs up are, my evaluation of how good they are. Okay, another thing to consider, a new thing to consider, is that when you want to run a search, when you're going to build an app in SharePoint designed to use search, then you're going to need to request permissions, quite often going to need to request permissions to execute that search. If the search you want to run is only against the app that you wrote, then you don't need any special permissions. You get that. And just to be clear, because there's some level of confusion about this, when you create an app, if you were to create an app and that app had a list in it, like a contact list in it, search will crawl that app. Okay? That stuff is going to go into the index in the farm where that app is hosted. If you are searching just your app, then you don't need any special permissions. You can do that. You can create a search experience that just searches that list inside your app. That's fine. If you want to search beyond that, if you want your app to be able to search the farm, then you're going to have to ask for a permission grant to do it. And this is the grant that you need, query as user ignore app principal. And when your app gets installed, you're going to see the standard Trust It dialog come up that says, do you trust this app to go ahead and do this query? So just recognize you'll need to make that special permission grant. The other thing that's important, I'd mentioned this before, is the export-import search settings. The reason we care about this inside of apps is because we can package our exported search settings with an app. And when that app is installed, all of those foundational things like result sources can actually be installed in the SharePoint farm where our app is going. So that means that you can create an app that's based on these building blocks and then know that those things are going to be able to be installed in the target environment. Okay, so for our last trick, let's go ahead and take a look at an app in SharePoint. So I'll do a demo for you here first, and then we'll take a brief look at the code that made it happen. I'll come up here and we'll look at, the first thing I want to look at is, let's go ahead and look at this search app, which offers us the full experience. So one of the things that the team has worked very hard on that I think is something you'll really appreciate is the ability to take the full search experience that you have in the Search Center, the things that you're used to doing in Search Center, and make those available inside an app. So I'm going to show you an example of that where we come up to just this basic search app right here. And here is a document search app. Now, I want you to look at this for a second. You know, you really have to look for a second to understand this is actually an app that I'm running, because this experience looks very, very similar to what you're doing inside of Search Center. And this can be a really valuable thing, right? If you want to create search-based apps that have the same feel and they don't give the end user this jarring, experience as they move into your app, you can do that. And you can see that we're basically just searching documents in the farm. That's what this app is doing. I can come up here and refine on it, and it basically behaves exactly the way that you think it should behave. So the way that this is done is actually simpler than you might think. Let's open up the code for it. If I go to the page for this app, the home page essentially that's being displayed, you'll see that I have this ASPX page, and then I have some web parts on here. I have the search web parts, the refinement web part, the search box, and the result box. So basically what we are able to do is drop these web parts into our app, and then they bring that search experience to the app. The real key thing here is if you look at a couple of the properties, notice that there's a template down here, so you can specify what template is used to display the results in your app. And then the real key thing here is this one right here. I want to point this out to you, the data provider JSON. The data provider JSON. If you look really closely in here, it says source name, and the source name is documents. And it says source level, and the source level is SP Web. So let me explain to you what's going on. If you export your search settings and you package them in an app, they can be installed for use by only your app. They can also be installed at higher levels when the app gets installed. And then this web part goes looking for that result source, and it can use it to drive the experience. So in this case, we're defining a new result source called documents, and we're telling the app to use that. Now, right now, the experience of creating this, of packaging up this app, is a bit cumbersome, but we're expecting some tooling to come to us in a few months. So look for that. Okay, last one. The last thing I'm going to show you is just a straight-up app that's an employee directory. This is the SharePoint version of the Windows 8 app that I was showing you. This is doing exactly the same thing, just making a RESTful call to that people endpoint using last name and a wildcard. But now we're rendering it in a SharePoint app and getting that A through Z directory. So you can see that, again, that's a pretty simple way to solve some common problems. Okay, I got us pretty close to the end here, and I think the good news is we're pretty close to the end of our material. Perfect. Here's our summary. Okay, so what do? We took a look at an overview for developers. So I showed you guys all the extensibility points, and we tried to focus on things that we could do in O365 and on-premises. I gave you the search building blocks. We talked about no-code stuff, then the REST and CSOM endpoints. And finally, we looked at making apps that are search-based inside of SharePoint. I think we're right dead on the time here. I'll go ahead and stay up here if you guys have questions. But other than that, thank you very much for your attention. Enjoy the rest of the conference.